After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.
Welcome to the Hunting Collective Podcast, numero uno, number 1, coming to you live from Mexico. I'm sitting on a ridge, a nice glass and tit, as some would call it, in the middle of Sonora, the middle of cartel country. I got a little recorder, some binos, and a pretty cool guest. First guest is Steve Rinella. We've been here hunting for the last 6 days, chasing Cous deer, or Cous deer, some call them, in the middle of arid desert, mountainy landscape that can only be described as beautiful, challenging. Steve and I have been hiking around for 6 days and talking about life, talking about hunting, talking about politics, just getting to know each other better as we've been knowing each other for years and have been friends. And in that way, that makes him the perfect first guest for the Hunting Collective. Steve is, of course, an author, a writer, a great example of a modern hunter. And because he is that, because he's a great example of and a bastion for hope for the future of hunting, I wanted to talk to him about how he feels right now, how he felt in the past about hunting, and maybe ways to fix some of the problems that we have, or feel hopeful about some of the positives that are happening right now. And I think we were able to do that in about an hour and a half. So give us a break. This is our first try to podcast, but hopefully the Hunting Collective will continue to have interesting guests that can help us examine our own ideas about hunting, our own philosophies, and why we go outside. So without further ado, Mr. Steven Rinella. Steve, you're one of the best orators I know. So
I like how this is going.
Yeah, I like to start off with a little compliment to the guest, you know? It really smooths it over.
That's an old trick, man.
Yeah. Describe where we're at.
We are in Sonora, Mexico, close enough to the U.S. border that if we look to the north, we can see a very ominous looking surveillance blimp that seems like that hovers over the landscape like the spaceship in the movie District 9, if you've seen that. So there's that. There's like looking at that, which one would imagine has the most sophisticated equipment on it in the world. Yet I am sitting literally in rabbit droppings and cow manure.
Yep.
On a hillside covered in a lot of juniper and ocotillo and oak and mesquite and very dry yellow grass. Good?
Yeah, that's pretty good. I like it.
A lot of exposed rock.
Yeah, it is exposed.
And a lot of stuff that looks like it does not get a lot of rainfall.
That's true. A lot of dry riverbeds, dry creek beds. A lot of places for Cous deer to be hiding out today. But I don't believe we've seen anything we wanted to chase. But just for those listening, we're both binos in hand. So if we have to break a bit from the podcast, you'll know why.
Because we found in our chasing a big buck.
And we can start this over whenever. that ends. Hopefully pretty soon, because this is the last day of a 6-day hunt here in Sonora country, cartel country. We haven't seen any cartel, but we have seen and killed some Cous deer. Steve, you got a pretty damn good one 5 days ago, didn't you?
The first full day of the hunt, which never happens. Well, okay, I've hunted Cous deer 5 times, each time for a week or so. And I've killed Cous deer 2 times. So, and in those times I put in a lot of hours and also looked at a lot of deer, but hunting Cous deer, you tend to there's a couple things about it. I've always hunted Cous deer late in the year, not always, but mostly in January. And so at that point, I usually have a pretty full freezer, right? Because I've been hunting all fall. So I'm not feeling like in a real meat crisis. And it's a place that I really just like to hang around and observe. And you spend, like today, we will spend from dawn till dark. We'll spend the entire day on one knob, on one Punta Alto, as they say in Spanish.
See.
And so it's just it's just kind of an intense focus on just observation, watching the landscape, observing deer. And you like to kind of drag it out. Yeah. And so I think that because of how enjoyable it is and the weather, you couldn't imagine better weather than Sonora in January.
Nope.
And so, you don't go running off after the first buck you see. So you kind of like in my mind, hunting Cous deer is almost it's like a vacation-y kind of thing in some way. And, you like to wait and try to find a big one. What's happened to me a couple of times in the past though, is I'd let some bucks slide. And then on the last day or two, be like, okay, I'm going to change my attention now to get a meat buck, and then not be able to find one. Because there's a big difference out here between finding one and getting it.
Yeah. Oh, of course. We found plenty that we haven't. You see them, they step behind a bush, and that's it.
It's over. They just vanish, man. And the landscape is so corrugated and just full of hell holes and creases that, things just pop up and then you never see them again. And it's often it's often that they're popping up 1,200, 2,000 yards away, and then they're just gone. Sometimes before you can even tell what they had going on, you just get this basic idea that you're looking at a buck, and then it vanishes and you spend a day trying to find it again and never find it again.
Yeah. It's the literal version of a topographic map. I mean, you're looking at this place and it's cuts and divides and dry creek beds and brushy hillsides and clear grassy hillsides. And
it's the kind of place where it's not readily obvious, even what way the rivers are flowing.
Yeah.
You feel like you'd get into a river channel and somehow walk a circle.
Yes, absolutely. And for me, you're right. I mean, this is the end of the year. We left the day after New Year's Day, and it's quiet here. It's eerily quiet. Hopefully the sound on this first podcast doesn't have a lot of wind and you can just hear how quiet it is here. And even though we're sitting together, a lot of times we split up and you sit by yourself and you're just focused on nothing but what's in the field of view of your binos. And that's a pretty healthy reset for the whole next year to come.
What I've thought of hunting down here before, I've kind of thought is that the estancias or the ranches down here, really the only place in the U.S. that you can kind of get a sense for it would be some of the wilderness areas or some of the more remote corners of Nevada.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain. How still, I mean, these guys still, people, you see razors. It seems like you see, UTVs more and more, but still work cattle and horseback. It's just quiet out here, man. Big, huge properties.
Yeah. I mean, we can see how many miles can we see right now in this vista to this next mountain.
Well, that blimp's 50. But I to be honest, I don't see it. I'm not actually looking at the blimp right now, but it's I'm sure I could.
It's been a constant on the landscape this entire time. No, it's that's what strikes me about this type of hunting And we're here on a ranch that is a private ranch, but we kind of made the decision just to do it on our own. I mean, we don't have any guides. We don't have anybody telling us where the deer are, where they aren't, where the big deer live, where they might be. So we're just finding the highest glass and tit, just glassing. And there's some purity in that. I know I've heard, I don't know if it was you or your brother at some level, talk about the purity meter of a hunt.
Purity. Matt.
Matt?
My brother Matt has a purity score.
Talk about
which is weighted very heavily to demonstrates a lot of bias.
What's your purity score? Is this pretty high on the list?
Yeah, it's high, man. I mean, like, to steal his idea, which I guess is hardly unique, of a sort of purity score on a hunt. I do rate public land higher, only because, just speaking very generally, like in a very general sense, it is much harder to be consistently successful on public land than it is private land. I mean, this is a gross generalization, but public land has, generally has open access. And if you're talking about hunts that are kind of like over the counter taking place on public land, there's open access and there's no coordination, or little to no coordination between people using the landscape. So you're often, instead of working in coordination with whoever else might be out there, you're working, you're kind of plotting against each other in like a very friendly way. But you're like, I got a feeling those guys will go there. I'm going to get up an extra hour early and get there. There's that kind of stuff. Hunting on private land, you have, generally speaking, less people out and sort of coordinating their activities, and it's just different. So if purity winds up being like some kind of difficulty, then yeah, I rate that pretty high. I rate, like, here's a way of putting it. How excited and surprised a hunt has high purity, I guess, if you're shocked that you were successful, it tends to have a higher purity. And you say that, right? Because it's like those hunts where you're like shocked to be successful are great. But then why is it also great to go out and realize that you're in the middle of a huge duck migration?
Yeah.
And then all you talk about is how great it was because ducks were just piling in no matter what you did. You could be shooting off flares and they're still landing your decoys. And that's somehow great too. But so it's so full of like personal biases. It's hard to really talk about it in any kind of real way, but I do like the ones where you're nervous about whether you'll be able to work it out. And then success comes down to you really working hard and putting in your best effort and having it pay off and being kind of like surprised and pleased that it worked out.
Yeah. Is there a level of predictability there? If it's an unpredictable landscape, like in this case, it's fairly predictable where we can and can't go. I mean, we can go the borders of this ranch and we kind of can talk to the locals and get a bit of a prediction on what's good and what's bad, but we can't predict the migration. We can't predict the rut. We're here just trying to catch it. Is predictability
kind of like a little bit far out? Yeah. So if you're going to like map out, like let's say we're going to map out the purity score.
Let's do it.
Well, a thing that I would bring in too is that, so our buddy, like we have a friend, Jay Scott, who facilitates both guided and non-guided hunts for Cous deer in Sonora. So this is a rancher he's worked, but he hasn't hunted it. So that in my mind, as I'm like doing this very biased, very personal purity score thing, like in my mind, the fact that we're sort of on the vanguard of hunting this place, that adds a little purity to me. That we've never hunted it before adds a little purity to me because discovery is important.
Yeah, unpredictability. Something.
Yeah. So if we learned, because now we know this sumbitch pretty well.
Yeah, we do.
Not all the way, but we've learned a lot. Like we've hunted dawn till dusk, a lot of guys swapping a lot of notes. So we know a lot about it. Coming back next year, yes, absolutely. There'll be a teensy bit less purity in my mind because we already knew it. Right. So the fact that we're just kind of like figuring it out and don't even have like super strong guidance, makes it kind of fun. But then I've done this sort of thing a lot of times. So I kind of like understand how to put it together. There's a lot of hunting where I'd be clueless, but this, even though we're south of the border, this is a type like arid, open country spot and stalk hunting is something that I've devoted a great deal of, time to figuring out. And I kind of like understand it now, and I'm able to apply it to a handful of different kinds of animals.
Well, as you get going in your life, and I've found this, I'm sure you're the same. Your purity score, it's harder and harder to score high. The more you hunt, the more places you go, the more things you see, the more experiences you have, it's harder to score high on purity.
Yeah.
You give yourself a bigger, a bigger room for error early on. You're like, man, it's cool just to see Mexico. Once you've seen Mexico, once you've seen this country and you understand what it is and hunted Cous deer, then maybe you're not so, next time the purity score is just a little bit further. So maybe next time if you're looking to introduce a difficulty you didn't have on this trip, you bring your bow.
If you'd have put me out here 20 years ago, no, I know exactly how I would have hunted it. And I think that I would have been shocked and surprised were I to get any buck.
Yeah.
Because we would have come out and we'd have just walked up and down, up and down, up and down, thinking you're going to like jump one up or whatever. That's just how we would have hunted it back then. And so back then, had I gotten one, I would have been like stunned. Right. And we'd be like, if me and my brothers would come down and we all wound up getting a buck, even just spikes and forkies, right? We'd be all worked up. But yeah, just through kind of like learning how to do this, over, a long period of time, you do kind of come into situations. You come into a lot of hunting situations feeling a little bit more cocky.
Yeah.
Like I did a hunt this year, with our mutual friend Remy, and I had been applying for years for an elk tag on the Fogneck Island. Finally drew one, and just so happens that a buddy of mine had drawn it and been on the hunt a couple times before. So he came with. Now, cause he went before, he just knew like how it goes. Right. And he just knew how to work it. And so going with him, it was an completely different experience than what I expected, because he kind of told me like, here's what I think will happen when we go. And that wound up happening. And he was very much in the driver's seat on that hunt because he was coming in it with the knowledge. And that's the kind of stuff you seek out, right? So you seek out people who know what's going on, and that's like an important part of learning, but it just winds up being a different experience. Not that I didn't have a great time on that hunt, but it was very different than if I just went and cold rolled into it.
Yeah.
I think one of the highest purity score hunts I ever did was, I was probably, I don't know, I think it was in my first year of graduate school, and my brother had gone down. He was going to graduate school in Auburn, Alabama, and he started messing around out on Tuskegee National Forest. So he had just moved there, and me, both my brothers, and a buddy of ours all decided to go do a hunt in Tuskegee National Forest. And we don't know anyone. I didn't have any kind of network. This is like before stuff was widely available on the web. Like you didn't go find information like this on the web. And we just went down and started hunting Tuskegee. And we had, a week or so, and everybody got a buck, and I got a buck on the last day that was so small that when I skull capped it, I could put it in my shirt pocket. That buck rack, that little spike rack, rode home with me in the shirt pocket of my shirt.
Front shirt pocket?
The front shirt pocket.
Oh my God.
That's how I skull capped it. I just left a little narrow sliver of bone, and it had 2 like 1.5 inch spikes, not a button buck, but a small spike. But dude, we'd like done it, right?
Yeah.
Everyone in the world everyone in the world, like in the East, everyone wants the dreams of going to the West. We went from Montana to go hunt Alabama in a national forest.
Why Alabama?
Because my brother had gone down there for graduate school. I'd gone to Montana for graduate school. He went to Alabama for graduate school. And so we just went and hunted Alabama and like figured it out on a national forest. And I still count that as being like one of the coolest hunts I ever went on.
I think that's true. I mean, the coolest hunts I ever went on when I was growing up were those hunts where we had Green Ridge State Forest in Maryland where I grew up. And you just get a couple of buddies, get your dad and your neighbor, you go up there and you walk around. If you shot a spike, that was the best. If you made it to a spot where you could camp and camped out by the creek, and when I was old enough, had a few beers, that was just as well. But we didn't wrap any kind of trophy measurements other than the fact that we were together with people that we cared about. That's all we ever did. And I found that hunting became more complicated once I kind of developed my own sensibilities and heard about everyone else's sensibilities and what they wanted to do, and got into this business and learned that I had to figure out, what my ideologies were and what my ideas were about hunting, because I can't just walk around the woods with my dad and my neighbor anymore.
At first, the different perspectives on the outdoor world, the natural world hunting, they come as this like deluge, right? And it's disorienting. And you might look at it and think like you just see all kinds of things that seem sort of ugly. But then when you realize that all of those practices are coming from something that probably developed very naturally and was passed on patrilineally, and then later you try to dig through it and find out what parts of the world at large are worth keeping and what parts of the world at large you'd like to see vanish. And, it's like fun to be able to toy with all these ideas.
Yeah.
Well, we used to hunt with a much more narrow understanding of the world.
Yeah. Well, that's what I think about when you take new hunters that are, 20 years and older in their adult stages of their life. I get a lot of that. I'm sure you get the same. A lot of people. No, I think that, new hunters, you struggle when you're, say you're 25 or 30 or 35 or even older, and you seen hunting on social media, or you experience someplace in your life and you want to pick it up. I think it's tough. Social media makes it tougher because you see, people that you either respect or admire doing, the ultimate. Maybe it's a private ranch elk hunt or something like that. And you see those things, the films that we make in the hunting industry and the ways that we portray it. And you see those things, you see the pinnacle of hunting represented in our media. And I don't know that you get a sense that you can just be like you were in Tuskegee or like I might have been in Maryland. You can just be someone who is exploring the natural world, learning about animals, and you just happen to have a bow or a rifle in your hand. I mean, I think that's something you lose if you don't pick up hunting early on, and you're introduced to it through the modern media cycle. I think that's a struggle, something that we should think about.
You mean that it creates unrealistic expectations?
Absolutely.
About what people are going to find.
Well, and it creates this ideologue that you have to do it a certain way. You have to look a certain way and act a certain way. And you have to, the bigger the animal, the more successful you might be. But when you were in Tuskegee and when I was in Green Ridge State Forest, we never thought twice. We never had the ability to think twice, or the perspective or the sensibility to think twice about whether that 4-point or 6-point or 10-point was success. There was other things. I'm always interested in your relationship with your dad, one, and then your relationship with your brother as well. But brothers, Danny and Matt, I think that lays a strong base about who you are as a hunter and what the rules are and what your expectations are. Talk about that. Talk about your dad, your first experience hunting, and just what it shaped in you now that's important.
I was raised in Western Michigan. My dad was born in the south side of Chicago. He was raised by his grandparents who spoke Italian in the home. He was brought up.
Got a radio. We'll just let this go on the podcast. This is, I believe, Giannis Patelis, the Latvian Eagle. Go, Yanni, you're on the podcast.
Wow. These boys just got to the Ranger. We're sitting here thinking about coming up towards you guys. You guys still down with the plan of pounding the north end?
Yeah, we're down with that plan. If you just follow that road up to around the tit where we are, you should be able to spread out and see into buck territory.
When you guys were walking that road this morning, did you guys go through any canyon-y type stuff that might be a good spot to hang this meat?
Yeah, there's plenty of good stuff in there to hang the meat.
Excellent. We'll ring you when we're close.
You know, they're going to tell them they're going to have to pack it for a few hundred yards.
You're going to have to pack it for...
No, they're close to it when they park, right?
Yeah, you'll be close to it when you park, but you may have to pack it a couple hundred yards. Thanks for joining the podcast, Yanni.
There's a phone in.
Thanks
for having me on. Hopefully we can do this again. It's been great.
You're just a great guest. Thanks. Thanks, Yanni. The great Latvian Eagle, who is Steve's right hand man for everything meat eater.
Yeah, so my old man, so like he grew up with no idea about hunting. He was always drawn to it and really interested in it, but he didn't start hunting until after World War II. Then he got serious about it. But so I was born in Western Michigan. We grew up hunting a mix of farms, people that my parents knew through church and just through the community. 200 acre, 300 acre farms, and then mixed public land. The first deer I ever missed, I missed on public land with my bow when I was 11. And the first deer I killed on private land with a gun when I was 13. And we had long hunting seasons. So we would start, kind of the rule in our household was that you could take a half day off school for the opening of squirrel season on September 15th. You could take a half day off school for the opening of bow season on October 1st. We could always take November 1st off because that was the opening of trapping season. So we'd start setting muskrat traps at midnight on Halloween. And then usually got to run, set traps all through the 1st. And then you could take the full day off school for November 15th gun opener. And you didn't have to go to school on your birthday. So I would always go ice fishing on my birthday with my dad. But on November 15th, like, if you didn't kill a deer by about, like how that moment when the morning seems to kind of end.
Yeah.
Right?
Post-dawn.
Yeah, post-dawn. You would just, if you didn't kill a deer by like 9 in the morning, 9:30, 10, you just get a sinking feeling. And statistically, you're backed up. It's like, if you didn't kill a deer on opening day, like your chances of getting a deer, or let me put it this way, you had a greater chance of killing a deer on opening day than you would if you hunted all, whatever it was, 14 days of the season. So more than half the deer got killed on opening day.
That's crazy. Sounds similar to where I was.
This sinking feeling. And the idea that you would ever pass up any buck, it was a laughable notion back then because there weren't big bucks.
Yeah.
Bucks got, like, 2.5-year-old bucks were rare. In the places we hunted. Like, bucks just got shot. And you did your fair share of the shooting. And to even begin the idea of, like, getting on board that people were going to start passing up bucks, it was just an idea whose time had not yet come. And so to be a very successful deer season would be you'd get a deer with your bow and get a deer with your gun.
Yep.
That was a very successful season. If there were guys, you knew about guys who could kill a deer every year with their gun and kill a deer every year with their bow. Like, those were the dudes you would go and ask for advice.
Were you always one of those guys?
No.
Was your brothers?
Well, we would get deer, but I would here's the thing is, like, during those years, I was very devoted to fur trapping. So I didn't put, I prioritized that. I prioritized trapping. I would kind of measure the success of my year more by kind of like trapping activities. But yeah, there would never be a year. I mean, from the time I was 13 on, there would never be a year when I wouldn't get a deer.
Yeah.
Like I would always get a deer with somehow. Usually, I'd hunt them with my bow and then get one with my gun. But no, I wasn't like a 2 deer a year guy. I remember later in college up in the UP of Michigan, I remember the first time I shot 2 deer in a day. I killed a fawn with my bow in the morning and then killed a little Michigan 8-point buck in the evening. And I felt like I was a hunting god. That didn't happen, man. And then I killed another buck that year, like another little Michigan 8 with my gun that year. And that was like, yeah, I mean, that was just like sort of like you kind of like quit hunting after that, right? There was no more that could be done in the hunting world besides that. And I remember that we had eaten all of those deer by Christmas break.
Jeez.
Yeah, we just ate deer meat and hunted deer.
And so
but here's the thing, I wasn't trapping anymore.
Yeah.
I had quit trapping that year.
Well, your brothers both trappers too, or are they just hunters?
They started out trapping, but they were more interested in hunting. And then as the fur prices went down, they just got less and less interested in it. It was funny because there was one year around when I was 12 or 13, I kind of like didn't really trap that much that year. And they went out and caught 2 mink one day, and mink were worth like $40. And I was so overcome by jealousy that I got back in hard to trapping and then trapped until I was 22.
And what ages are your brother? What ages were your brothers? They're both older than you?
Yeah, they're like staggered out, like a year and a half and a year and a half. Yeah. So I was the little brother, and which is kind of a luxury because you wind up getting you get all the privileges early. You know, my parents didn't enforce multiple sets of rules.
Yep.
It's too confusing. So as my older brother, when it would become like okay for him to do something, they were just like, okay, it's okay for everyone to do that too. So like in high school, I had no, what do you call it? We're supposed to be home at a certain time? Not an alibi.
An alibi. Yeah.
Alibi.
I never had one of those either.
Curfew. So like in high school, I was like, didn't have a curfew anymore because obviously my older brother's like, doesn't because he's in college. And so they would just be, rather than having all these rules, they would just get that rule. So what it meant was I could do kind of like more, you know, I was able to get in and do more kinds of hunting and have more sort of freedom out in the woods earlier than he did, even because, you know, because he was like the first one coming up. You know?
Right.
Kind of like, I know with our own kids that you tend to be a little bit slower than when the other ones come and you realize that nothing bad's happened to anyone yet. You kind of cut them all loose.
Yeah.
So I had like a lot of freedom to be around out in the woods and to be gone all day wandering around.
After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry. With pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.
What are your memories? I have all these. I've written about this before, and I know you have too. Your just early memories of your hunting with your dad. I've got little things like what we packed for lunch and how he'd sit and how he'd hold the shooting sticks and how I'd miss all the deer.
Good memories. Yeah, my mind is packed full of stuff like that about like even just the food thing you brought up, like what you'd have for lunch. That prior to hunting season, prior to like small game opening, he would fill milk crates up with like a collection of food. So there'd be prunes with the pits in them for what he'd like to have those in his tree stand, just to like keep busy eating something. Glass jars of jarred venison, bags of jerky, boxes of saltine crackers.
Yeah.
He had some way he would buy that like, those huge blocks of cheese that are given out like government cheese.
Government cheese, yeah.
Met a guy that would sell my dad his government cheese. So some of that. But yeah, and he would just like get this. I remember it was like a big part of the year would be filling these milk crates up with food that was going to live in the back of his Jeep Grand Cherokee as we hunted that year. And he would build these when we went camping to hunt up on public land to the north. He would build these like old timey LL Bean camps where you're lashing sticks and shit up
the old
trees
buck pole
to make like wash basin platforms. It's like, yeah, crazy shit that would be so labor intensive that just like not how we camp now. We tend to camp with, like you said, a stove in the dirt and sleep in the dirt, and it's just pretty simple. But these kind of annoyingly elaborate, old-timey camps. Yeah, I remember it all.
And there's just little things like that. My dad used to pack toast cheese, crackers. There's orange. I just remember, like, in the morning, in, like, the pre-dawn morning, I remember opening those and him getting pissed at me because they were loud, and I'd be crunching them. It's little things like that I always remember. And I wonder how, when you get to this level, when you get to this kind of hunting that we're doing now, you miss those little details, the things that aren't as special, that aren't as nostalgic, just because how many days a year this year have you hunted, been out in the field?
No, man,
A lot. Me too.
I do miss the nostalgia. You know what I'm nostalgic for is not so much that, and I'm sure that'll come later, to be nostalgic for that time with my dad. What I think about now in terms of my dad was I think about how just kind of like off we got, or always were. He was a demanding person. Very difficult person, high expectations. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I resented that a lot. And now I see there was like a method to his madness, right? Like I see now what he was getting at. Now that I have kids, I understand what he was getting at. He didn't care. He wasn't interested in being anyone's friend.
Yeah.
Like, I think in his mind, he was like, I need to raise people that are self-sufficient and hardworking and that know how to figure shit out. And that's all I'm really doing. I don't care about anyone having fond memories of this whole thing, of anyone feeling like we're buddies. Like, that's not my priority. My priority is like, I'm trying to produce something here.
Isn't there some selflessness in that?
I'll produce it at any cost.
Yeah.
And I resented it, but now I understand it. So, but I have yet to get to a point where I'm like nostalgic for those times. What I am nostalgic for is for those times in my 20s, early 20s, when me and my brothers and our buddies from growing up were sort of just starting to realize there's this big outdoor world beyond the handful of activities that we participated in. Like that we knew like the spots we hunted, the spots we fished, but all of a sudden we started would drive a long ways to go to a certain river, and just started really kind of stretch our legs and check out new stuff and just go hunt stuff we'd never hunted before and fish stuff we'd never hunted before, or drive down to the Florida Keys and try to catch a bonefish, or go up and try to catch a summer run steelhead somewhere. That's what I'm nostalgic for, is that early exploration where you hadn't seen anything yet. And it was just all this kind of moment where you're like, holy shit, you kidding me? This is all out there?
Yeah. I
thought the only thing that was out there was an 8-mile radius of my house.
Could you imagine 20 years ago this type of life that you're leading now? This adventuring, public speaking, writing, a leadership position in that world and hunting world?
No, not really, man. And no, because I think that if you look at however you want to chop it up, if you want to chop up life, for the point I'm trying to make, I'll say I'm going to chop up life in 5 years or 10-year increments. There's never been a point at which I wouldn't have been, if I looked in a crystal ball and saw the next 5 or next 10 years, there's never been a point at which I wouldn't have been shocked by what I saw and wondered how that would possibly have come to be. I anticipate that feeling might end at some point in time, but so far it has not.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
I would have like in personal life too, like that I would have like 3 children. No way.
I think when we first podcasted on Meat Eater last year, I was just a new dad. I'd probably had been a month. And even up to that point, I didn't believe it. My entire life, I thought, well, there's no way I'm going to have a kid. I see other people that have kids. A lot of other people that have kids. But I don't think that I'm well suited enough for that thing. I'll never be prepared for that. I'll never know what that feels like. And I kind of just...
I'd like to point out and interrupt that you might not be prepared for it. I don't mean that personally.
I agree. I can agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I still to this day, I go home and I see this kid there and I think, I'm lucky to have this, but what is this? How do I handle this? 5 years ago, me would have just looked on this like some kind of fictional fairy tale that I'd written. I'm sure, is that something you feel? And when you're in Guyana or sitting in a place like this and you just try to think about that kid that was squirrel hunting or even the kid that was exploring from graduate school. I mean, is there a comparison?
No, I don't think about it like that. And I think the reason why is because I was there for it all. So it wasn't like that like that crystal ball feeling is if you imagine looking ahead, you didn't see all the steps, you know, but because you're kind of like there for every moment, it all has this sort of logical progression to it. I can't remember who the writer was, but there was a writer that described the process of writing a book as they equated it to driving at night, where you can never see any farther than your headlights, but somehow you just keep moving and eventually get there. And I feel that that their analogy about writing a book is kind of true for life, where you just see like what's ahead of you, but every little step ahead you kind of makes sense. And you just keep moving along and the things immediately in front of you make sense. And then all of a sudden you arrive somewhere else. But what's interesting now is if I've pushed toward sort of these like pinnacles of hunting, and to say that I don't want to act like I don't want to seem to be suggesting that there's like kinds of hunting that are great, and I do kinds of hunting that are great, and other people do kinds of hunting that aren't as fun. I'm not trying to say that, but but sort of, and exotic's not the right word either, but really kind of like challenging kind of hunts where you're like deeply immersed in the experience for days on end and just focused on doing something very difficult in a pretty wild place. Okay.
Yep.
Like I've been able to do that kind of stuff. But right now that my kids are getting a little bit older, I'm actually looking forward now to sort of regressing back to like the very introductory stuff. Like to be totally honest with you, like outside of professional things, like, you know, like I sort of, my ideas and my work are kind of based around hunting. This is what I do. But to be honest with you, to go back to that farm where I killed my first deer and take my kids out there squirrel hunting on a September 15th, dude, like
that's the best.
Like, that's the hunt I want. Like that's the hunt I want to do. And I'm trying to really find a way to be able to do that a lot more. Even though I have a lot of, you know, I still have a lot of desires to do the other kind of stuff. I'm trying to find a way to like add that in, because I don't really know that I want to take my kids and introduce them to, I want them to see all layers of it. Right. Yeah. And not just have it be that, oh, you know, I know some guys have this big private ranch. We're going to go out to a private ranch and hunt turkeys, and you can call in 10 toms a day. I don't know that that's like what their first experience should be, really. I don't know. I feel like I kind of want them to see it sort of like how I did it, because everyone feels that there's, well, most people feel that there's some value in how you were raised, right? I think that when parents and people in other ways somehow get rid of the idea that there was any value in how they were raised and try to just do everything in this novel fashion, or that they try to like read about how to do it, and they don't think that there's any sense or rhyme or reason in what their own experiences were that made them a person that they might be proud of. Like if you're the kind of person, if you've become something that you're proud of, you have to go look at like, what are the factors that made me this way?
Yeah.
Not that all of it was great, but there has to be some components to it that were important. And if we're just talking about like a hunting life and a life spent outdoors and a life spent around wildlife, I can't get away from the feeling that there's something about wandering around a little chunk of woods with a 22 looking for squirrels, because a lot of the people that I enjoy most in life and want to spend the most time hunting and fishing with, that's how they grew up. There has to be something that has to do something to you to kind of make you, to kind of prime you for the bigger stuff later.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I know you probably don't talk about this much, because when you're podcasting, you're learning about people and talking to them. But I think in a way, those of us, I think you more than most, that have a platform in hunting, are you doing that with Meat Eater, with the podcast, with the TV show, with social media? Are you leading people down the path that you've been led without being able to take them there with you?
I try to. I think that I try to celebrate some of the things that are more accessible to people. I'm going to handle that question a couple ways, because one, I try to celebrate the kind of outdoor activities that are easily accessible to people. I'll go, and every year we go to fish catfish. We go to fish 1 and 2 pound channel cats. I take my kids to fish with their Uncle Matt for 1 and 2 pound channel cats. I try to put as much of an emphasis on that, which means a lot to me, and I love doing it. Or with small game and squirrel, and I try to celebrate those experiences so that everyone sees that there's or try to help people see the value in the resources and activities that they're able to engage in. The other thing I try to do, if I have sort of a mission, if there's a thing that I would try to convince people of, it would be that I would try to teach people something that I learned very slowly, and I wish I maybe would have learned it a little bit quicker, would be that you need to look and find out in this world what you love, okay? And identify the feeling you have as love. I was obsessed with nature as a kid. I was obsessed with animals as a kid. I wanted to be out hunting and fishing all the time. It took me a long time to just make the very obvious realization that this is something that I loved. Yeah. That these things and these places were things that I loved and had a lot of affection for, and that I would ultimately be willing to make sacrifices on the behalf of those things' betterment.
Yeah.
I had no idea about, growing up, it just wasn't something I really thought of.
Is there
thought about in my mind, resources, wildlife resources, landscape resources, in my mind, they had just kind of fallen from the sky, and they were there not because anyone did anything to make them be there, or not that you'd make them be there, not that anyone did anything to help ensure that they were there. It just was, right? Almost this biblical sense that it just always was there, always would be there. And it took me a long time, and to see some loss, in fact, to go oh man, this thing that I love so dearly is tenuous. It's not a given that it will always be around. And so I try to if I could have some thing that I could do, it would be help ease people through that transition of being yes, admit to yourself that you love it.
Yep.
Because everyone knows you love your children and love your wife and would take a bullet for them. Like literally you would take a bullet for them, right?
Absolutely.
You take a bullet for a lot of your best friends.
Absolutely.
And so to go and look and be like, here's this other thing I love too. It's not as like sort of immediately tangible. Like my kids, there's these little contained units that live in my house. It's just different. We're talking about landscape wide shit. But to recognize that, that these things that we care about, and that give our lives so much meaning, like requires something of us.
Do you feel like that initial feeling when you're a kid? And I had the same thing. We had public land where I grew up. It was just where we went. There was no philosophy or ideology behind the reasons why I loved it. I just loved being there.
Went and baha'd your truck out there, shot guns at trees, all kinds of
redneck shit that we enjoyed.
We'd go play a game called, do you remember the show Name That Tune?
Yep, of course.
We had a game, Chop That Tree. And you would say like, Dan, I believe I can chop that tree in 3 strikes. And then you'd take just like ridiculous. That's the kind of guidance I didn't have that I would like to try to give to my children a little bit. But, yeah.
But I don't think
just a place you went to mess around.
I don't think you can get to where you are and I am with that appreciation, the devotion to it. And I think it probably goes back to the headlights in the dark road. You can't get to the devotion that you currently have or that I currently have without first having the feeling of it being this serendipitous thing that you happen to live on the earth with. You happen to be created on the same plane as this landscape. I don't know that you can have a devotion that is pure as what yours seem to be without that initial.
Have the other steps.
If you didn't have that other steps.
Yeah, it's probably true, but I think a thing that I try to do or like to imagine myself doing would be that because I have the time, and sort of a developed ability, to articulate some of these things, and have the luxury to be able to spend professional time on it and trying to learn how to like articulate certain viewpoints, that you can provide people with a little bit of a shortcut in the thought process.
Yeah.
Where I think that, cause I know that there are things that could have been said to me when I was in my late teens. There were things that could have been said to me that would have helped me to understand a little bit of what I eventually became to understand much quicker, and that would have helped me make some better choices and not have made some of the mistakes I made in the woods. And I don't mean mistakes, I mean moral transgressions. That I would have not done some unethical things that I did.
Yeah.
Had someone taken a minute to talk me through some of the things. Like if I could talk to myself then now, I would probably give myself a swift kick, and then I would explain some stuff.
Yeah.
Like I had, I wanted to be a very successful trapper, right? And there was like a financial component to trapping, and I would take shortcuts. I would at times play pretty fast and loose with the rules out of this sort of arrogance that I knew better, or that just like a kind of greed, but not even like thought out. It wasn't like I laid in bed and had this sort of debate like, well, here's the pros of being, here's the pros of being a bad person. Here's the cons of being a bad person. It was just like impulsive stuff that I now wonder how I had got there, And none of it was like truly, I never did anything that was like actually damaging, but just looking now, I did some things I'm like a little bit embarrassed.
Well, don't you feel like when you
Mostly around traffic?
When you start hunting, or maybe trapping the same way, I've never done it, but it could be. When you start hunting, you don't, unless someone has specifically said this to you, you don't think about the value of life. There's more to the activity than the value of life. You're learning how to do so many things. You're learning about nature. You're learning about animals. You're learning about your own abilities to do things. Shoot a gun, shoot a bow, walk in the woods, walk quietly, sit for a long time, be patient. That the value of the life on the other end of the gun or the archery tackle there's no room for that in the beginning, because it's almost too heavy when you start. That's such a heavy thing to say, like, you're 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 years old. Let's talk about the value of this life in this grandly complicated exercise.
I think that I always understood the value of what I now think of as the ness, meaning I understood the value of deer nests.
Yeah.
I understood the value of like muskrat nests. The first animal that I really just became just kind of like fascinated with and wanted to understand so bad were river otters, right? Well, because river otters are really valuable, but I like really wanted to know river otters, and seeing them was so exciting that I understood sort of like the otter nests.
Yeah.
And how much, but no, it's only much later that you untangled all. But I think that the important part though, and I think it's like a thing that hunters understand and people that don't hunt don't understand, would be that I think hunters put a very high value on elkness, deerness, turkeyness, sort of the idea of them, or the well-being of the thing in perpetuity.
Yeah.
And not a ton of individual value, where I find that animal rights activists put a tremendous value on the individualness with no real, I shouldn't say no real, with generally with very little understanding of the ness.
Yeah.
So a hunter might look and say, like a certain type of hunter might look and say, yeah, I kill a deer every year. Let me take my friend Doug Dern. All right. Doug Dern kills a deer or two every year. But 365 days out of the year, Doug Dern is looking at his family's farm and also his state's wildlife policies and thinking about what will allow the deer on my farm, in my county, in my state to continue to thrive and to continue to hold cultural value, and what will allow us to have great deer, healthy deer herds going into the next generation, the next generation, the next generation. He sees that and he would take a bullet for that notion. But does he feel bad shooting an individual deer? No. Because the nest, like the deer nest matters to him. So, I think that's the thing. An animal rights person would look at the picture of a dead deer and they don't see the things that created that, the situations that created that, the landscape that created that and would allow it, and what sort of, what parameters need to be met, what things need to be satisfied in order to continue producing that.
Yep.
They just see that here's this individual thing that died. And it's just two different worldviews that can't really be reconciled.
Well, that's what I never wanted to start this talking about, the idea of what this podcast is going to be, but this is a good segue into that. I think the idea that it's called the hunting collective and that there is a collective idea of what we are, what you just described very well. I think I want to try to answer the question, is there a way to take those two worldviews, the idea of wildlife in its totality as hunters see the value, and the idea of the individual having value, having maybe more value than the whole. Taking those two ideas and finding a middle road and saying, we both value the thing, but we value it at different ends of the spectrum. You value its cuteness, its life, its, you always say like
individuality.
Its individuality, the sanctimonious nature of the way it lives and dies. Like, it should be able to live and die in a wild way. And maybe hunters say it should be able to live in perpetuity. Maybe a few of them have to die in what some would consider an inhumane way or an unnatural way. That's probably a whole nother deeper level of the argument, whether it is unnatural or not to hunt something. But the idea of that value system, I find that we're on the same plane, as much the same as a vegan is on the same plane as a hunter. You're both trying to mitigate or meter in some way your consumption. You're trying to find a way to better understand how your consumptive habits affect the world around you. That's what you're trying to do. And so I think in the same way that the animal rights activists and the hunter disagree, maybe the vegan and the hunter disagree in the same way, but you're living with the same reality that this is an important and valuable asset to the natural world. How do you feel like there is, is there a middle road or is there not one?
Yeah, I hope that you explore it so much that you wind up finding it, but I can't really picture it, because here's what it would take. Here's what it would take to bridge the gap. If I were to die right now, okay, I would die feeling that I had given something to the idea of American wildlife.
Yeah.
Okay. I would feel that I had contributed to a system that allows for the continued existence of American wildlife. I had contributed to it financially. I had contributed to it in a sort of, in a sort of spiritual sense, in that I feel like I had contributed to it to maybe help people see how much it means to them and how much it helps them, how much it represents a world that they believe in and want to have around. And I would feel that I had contributed to it, even in a much more minor way, in some kind of like policy sense, right? About how should we be doing this? How should we govern ourselves? But I think that if you went and asked, if you went and asked an animal rights advocate, hey, has this person contributed to American wildlife? I think that they would see nothing but a trail of death.
Yeah.
But that too, it gets into so much more difficult things, because that too, another commonality that like brings us together, but also tears us apart, is the idea of wild animals. Because it's much more upsetting to people we're using animal rights like as though it's just this monolithic thing that all animal rights people are the same way. But like an animal rights person is going to get more upset about the idea of a wild animal dying because they value wild animals more. Yep. And it's like, but here's the thing, I value wild animals so much more. So there's another way, like, how are we ever going to see eye to eye on that? Because if you think that, like, if deer hunting is upsetting to you, we're killing more cows.
Yes.
In a day.
Yes.
So it's like, how could you even live? Like, if an animal right, and this, I'm getting a little off track here, but if an animal rights person feels that all life is absolutely equal, and that a cow and a deer are the same thing as a person, then I would have to point out and be like, you are, spineless. Because if I thought that we were systematically slaughtering hundreds of thousands of Americans right now in factories, I would take up arms.
So we've gotten to taking up arms against the cow murderers.
So
the point you're making is that deer hunting is down the list of things to be.
Yeah. Point. Yeah. I'm being ridiculous. I want to back that up and say I'm like being ridiculous to demonstrate something that seems a little ridiculous to me. But the point is, all these places where we have commonality, like, I like wild animals more than domestic ones. They mean more to me.
Yeah.
I like to watch them. They're the ones I like to eat. So it's like, and I find that in common with people who have a real problem with hunting, is oftentimes they value wild animals more too.
Yeah.
So it's like, here we are being like, I love animals. I hope that they exist into the future. I especially like the wild ones. They'd be like, yeah, me too. I'd be like, and I eat them. They'd be like, you what?
You bastard. Son of a bitch. Yeah, I don't know where the intellectual hurdle lies. Maybe it's an emotional hurdle moreover than something that people.
It's an emotional hurdle.
Yeah.
Because it's just confusing.
Yeah.
It's just confusing. It's like, these ideas we're talking about are so confusing. People have an easy time understanding them if they're looking at like an indigenous group. we have a thing where we're able to say, I think that there's a thing in the American psyche of people who think about this a lot. We're able to look at an indigenous group and say, it's okay, like, it's good that they hunt, it's okay that they hunt, because they feel a deep connection to the animals, an almost spiritual connection to the animals. And I would say, yeah, I'm right there.
I'm right there with you.
I'm right there with them. It's something that I have devoted my entire life to. It's something that my father devoted a good amount of his life to. It's something that my paternal and maternal grandfathers were interested in. I carry with me, like, I have a sense of ownership for and deep concern for the well-being of the animals that sustain me. What trips people up is there's this idea that, well, you don't need to hunt. And I always wonder, like, okay, so who is the cultural force here? Who's going to step in and declare when people need to hunt and don't need to hunt? There are, when the Spanish conquistadors were in the American Southwest, there are letters that were written back to Spain by people on the ground in the American Southwest complaining about how the Native Americans would not stop hunting. And these letters honestly say, I can't figure it out. We gave them homes. We gave them livestock. We taught them to farm. These people insist on roaming around hunting. So would some of these people go like, okay, that's the point at which once they had access to another lifestyle, they should have quit.
They should have ended their lifestyle.
So by that logic, should we be striving for a time when we would ease the wolf off of meat? Is that the ultimate goal? And of course I'm being like, I entered into a highly theoretical realm, but if all society is pushing toward this point when you graduate into not hunting, who is the arbiter of when people should make the leap?
Well, I think that comes to the next thing I wanted to talk to you about. And it's an interesting question. Who's the arbiter? When they're looking at that, the point of arbitration, you look at British Columbia and the recent grizzly bear decision.
Yeah.
That was an arbitration of when can you hunt and what can you hunt and what are the reasons you can go. And so I think as hunters, we now have to better work as a group to define what hunting is for us and what acceptable forms of hunting can maintain themselves in this conversation. Because trophy hunting, or the term trophy hunting,
which is a very difficult term to define.
And we'll try here. We're going to try. We're about to try. Or we'll find a bug before we get finished talking about it. I think that idea, and we'll talk about it, the idea in itself, but that idea has become, in the popular sense, not the same type of hunting that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Not the same type of ancestral urge that you're talking about. So to define the urge that you have, which in my mind is a legitimate ancestral and just a lifestyle choice, to define that and then to define the other, like what parts of our hunting community are unacceptable and the ideas that we're just not going to change who we are, but what parts of the hunting community have already changed beyond that ancestral urge that you have and I have and that folks have, and beyond the feeling of, I've got to protect this thing. I've got to protect the idea of hunting, the idea of wildlife. How many hunters are thinking more about the size of the animal than those types of things? And does that disqualify them from this conversation?
I think that you'd have to have a much more sophisticated and nuanced lexicon to begin talking about kinds of hunting and types of hunting. Because it just winds up being way too complex. Right now, for instance, we're out hunting deer. We're out looking for large, mature bucks.
Yeah.
Now, I would rather get any buck than a large, mature one. Or what am I trying to say here? If it came down to it and I needed the meat, I would just shoot any buck. But if I have the time to put into it and have the location to do it, I'm also going to try to find a large, mature one, because I'm going to eat the meat and I like to have the antlers around. If I didn't eat the meat, let me approach this a different way. Let's say I shoot a big giant buck.
Yep.
And you said to me, God comes down, puts a gun to my head, says, you can take that head or you can take that meat. Can't take both. Every single time I would take the meat, not just from a pragmatic standpoint, but morally, I would feel like that would be my choice.
Your obligation.
Okay. So I would just do it naturally because I'd be like, well, I want the meat. That's what that's what our family eats. And I'd be like, I would do it sort of out of a moral obligation of like, what would be maximum value? Okay. What's like the maximum use to, like the maximum way to pay like the greatest respect to the idea of the thing, and like having a pragmatic approach of like, yeah, there's a ton of calories there. There's like a ton of protein there. I'm going to utilize that rather than utilize some small symbolic portion of the animal, which is the antlers. So time and time again, I'm going to make that choice. If you wanted to talk about a good kind, like in my mind, like a good kind of deer hunting, just specific to deer, I would have to say that, that when someone was faced with that choice, I think if they said, screw the meat, I'm going to take the antlers, I feel that you might need to re-examine your perspective on it.
Yeah.
But it's all too complicated because there's more factors in it than just that. Like, am I a worse person or a better person because if I shoot a buck, I keep the antlers on a bookcase in my house? I feel that it's probably because, like, to me, what does it wind up meaning? To me, it winds up being this like this symbol of the animal.
Yeah.
It's this token of the animal that I always look at and remember. Now, if I knew that I had wasted the meat, I would look at that set of antlers and all it would do is bring me shame.
Yeah. And sadness.
But instead, I look at the things that in my home, I look at them like, dude, that was like the greatest trip, the coolest thing. I'll always remember that place. I remember the people I'm with, and it winds up being like this emblem of something that I'm very proud of and feel very good about. So to be like, oh, you have hunting trophies in your home, therefore you must be a trophy hunter. It's like, I don't really know what that means. This is a trophy of something that I care a lot about and would take a bullet for.
Well, so I think that's the point. Are we able as a hunting community to say the difference? Trophy hunting is the idea of trophy hunting that there's no value in the life of the animal besides what's on top of its head is wrong. Like that, the valuation of the animal is, I only want to kill it if it's 400 inches or 200 inches. I value that and I don't value the other, being the meat or the experience or whatever. Are we willing to say that let's judge whether you're in our boat as hunters, in that ancestral boat, in that boat of people that are wildlife stewards and conservationists? We're all in a boat. Are we willing to push the people out of the boat who do not have or share the same values for the life that you do or I do?
I like the boat analogy.
You use it. I stole it from you.
Well, yeah, and I had put it one time, would be like, people say like, we're all in the same boat. And I'm like, well, one of the guys in this boat is shooting holes through the hole.
Let's push that motherfucker out. But that to me is all.
As is sabotaging this boat that we're all in together.
That's been the most interesting thing for me always to think about. How do we determine if there was a plank on our hunting boat? We're all in the same boat and there's a plank and we're determining who's going to walk the fucking plank. And I say to you, do you value the life of the animal? And you say, yes. So my second question is, what parts of that life do you value?
Yeah.
And you get that question wrong, you fucking walk the plank.
Okay. The only way I can start doing it is I tend to like go toward extremes. So, because extremes are helpful, and this causes a lot of friction when I'm arguing with my wife about things, because I'll tend to instead of dealing in the gray that we're actually focused on, I'll be like, well, let's imagine that we each pursued extremes of what we're talking about and see what that would look like. Okay. And to give you a sense, like say we're having an issue about the kid safety of the kid. My extreme, that I would be like, my extreme would be that you're, keeping them in a bubble, right? You're keeping them in a bubble and this, and her extreme would be that you're arming them, with a bunch of sharp objects that are laced with disease. Okay. So we just like think this way. So in order to take an extreme of like a kind of hunting that I really don't understand and that I think might be getting at what you're talking about, with valuing the animal or not, is like, let's say when you hear about a case of high fence hunting, okay, in a very small enclosure where a deer is raised up in a place and then it's turned loose into a small enclosure on the day that a gentleman is going to go up and shoot it.
Yep.
Now he would have had ample of opportunities to shoot it when it was in the back of a truck, but they're opting, in order to sort of lend this appearance of hunting, they're going to turn it loose into some sort of enclosure where this person can go pretend to hunt it. They hunt it. They don't want the meat. They just want the rack. And so they get this thing mounted on their wall and they hang it on their wall. Now, what are they doing when they hang it on their wall? They're not telling people, oh, that buck that you're asking about? Why, let me tell you about that buck. They raised it in a little farm and they turned it loose into an enclosure and I pretended to hunt it. No, they're putting the buck on the wall because they want people to look at the buck and they want people to see the opposite of what that buck is. They want people to see this sort of emblem of wildlife, this emblem of wildness, this thing that represents challenge, this thing that represents cultural value, this thing that represents sacrifice and dedication. Because that is what a lot of people look at a big buck and they think, man, you must have done your work. You must have done everything right. You must have been lucky. You must have had a great day. You must be very proud of all these accomplishments. And they're putting that symbol out. They know it's a lie, but they're putting it out because they know that they're dealing in those things.
Yeah.
The same way you would go and make a fake diploma and hang it on your wall because you want to revel in other people's impressions of what that is, even though you know that you're living a lie. In that case, I would look and be like, that is a bad kind. That's a guy shooting a hole in the boat. In the most extreme versions, I don't know if you saw this years ago, it was like, there's a guy actually pretending to hunt a drugged deer.
Never saw that, but I can imagine.
Okay. It's drugged. It can barely stand up, right? Because he wanted to be able to go and show these antlers to his peers and have his peers see in them something that he knew was a lie.
We got another guest appearance from Yanni Patelis. Giannis, come in.
So we made it up on a glass and tip, but we might be blocked by El Normal's ridge itself to the actual bench saddle that we saw him on last night. But I'm trying to figure out where you guys are at.
Oh, we're looking at it.
That would really help me orient. Tucked away in the shade.
Yeah, we're tucked away on the shade on the main ridge. You're still on the podcast, by the way. We're going to hang up a little signifier so you guys see where we are. But you're on the right ridge. Can you see us now? Steve's waving a red bag for you.
See me?
No.
No, we don't see you.
So we'll check back in a little bit.
We'll check back in a little bit. We're finishing up our podcast in a really deep ideological conversation about hunting and its worth in the modern world. So don't interrupt it anymore. Yanni.
My apologies, man. Just trying to find you a buck here on the last day. We'll keep smiling and keep glassing. You guys touch base when you're ready.
Keep smiling. Anyway, I can agree with you on the point of that extreme. I think then we have to figure out how to identify that person within the grander scheme of hunting. And not just going hunting with that person, because you or I would never go do that. That's not something somebody called you up, buddy called you up and said, hey, I'm going to High Fence Ranch. We're going to drug a deer and then we're going to walk around and shoot it. We would say, nah, I'm good. Go for it. But I'm good. Some people wouldn't.
But they're not even hunters anyways.
Yeah. And so in the landscape of things, I'm not going to name the things that I think are tending toward your notion of trophy hunting.
No.
But there are many organizations and things out there in the hunting space that support that kind of idea, that would tolerate and support the kind of idea that you just threw out there. Maybe tolerate's a better term for it, but would provide tacit support to that hunter who is misinterpreting or misrepresenting what hunting is and essentially lying about it. And I wonder how we either talk those groups and those people out of their idea of hunting, or gradually, slowly change their philosophies and ideologies, get them away from that. Because I think a lot of it's driven by dollars.
I don't think about the groups. I do think about the people, and I tend to. I tend not to think of like how to, I tend not to think of how to conduct a sort of purge as much as I tend to think about that if we continue to have conversations about what is it that we value, how do we maintain the things that we value, that people will make better, that people will come to make better, more sustainable choices.
Yeah.
I don't find myself thinking about, kicking people out of the club as much as I imagine making the, more clearly identifying the goals of the club and having people come to see value in that and have a conversation around what it should look like, and we all improve our ways. The same way that I feel that over the course of my life, I have thought a lot about the things I care about and figured out better ways to try to maintain the things I care about.
Yeah.
I think you could go back and look, and when I was, like earlier I mentioned, when I was in my late teens, setting snares in a zone where you weren't allowed to set snares. You might look and say, like, here's this guy, he's this, let's kick him out. And I would have, now I would like to think that, I'm thankful that I wasn't like kicked out of something. Like I came around to see the value in having, wildlife commissions and state fish and game agencies work with teams of biologists and policymakers to craft laws that we all agree to live by, so that we have an even playing field and don't overexploit our resources. I didn't see that at the time. I don't think that I needed like a bullet behind my ear. I just needed to have like some experiences and spend some time thinking about things to see that if someone says don't set a snare in this zone, it's not like you're positioned to just defy that. There's a way you can you can go to the commission and you can say, hey, it seems kind of like arbitrary and weird. Like, why can I do it that side of the highway, but not this side of the highway? Can you please explain it to me? How would I go about changing this rule? I think that it's not a fair rule. It's not well thought out, whatever. It's not just my position to be like, screw that rule.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I wasn't like thrown out. Because I eventually came to see value in that. I came to see value in that type of cooperation. So in my mind, it's like, the guy that, let's just say, and I don't even know, I hate to take like a single thing, like we got the drug deer, right? Like this single thing, I don't even know the full story behind it. It's sickening. It's just this like probably a very isolated occurrence. I don't want to put too much weight on it, but let's just talk about the drug deer guy. I don't know that guy could be rehabilitated. Right? It's so weird.
Yeah.
It's just so
It's a weird practice.
Yeah. It's just too weird to begin to think about. But I think that if you have a person who looks at an animal and recognizes its symbolic value, I feel that person could come around and through some thinking and reading and kind of understanding our conservation history in this country and how we came to have the richness of resources that we enjoy. I don't know. I feel that they might come to it and be like, you know what? I'm changing over time.
Yeah.
And my value system is changing.
Yeah. No, and I think you're right on, because there isn't any way. There's no tangible way. There isn't a boat that we're going to push people off of. And there isn't a set of rules beyond the game laws that we have that are going to allow us to kick anybody out of anything. As long as it's legal, it can be done. So I think the reason why we're talking on a podcast, and I'm sure the reason why you do what you do, is to continue. I think the way to fight what we see as a negative force in hunting is to continue to talk about this kind of stuff, is to continue to examine the important measures that we've taken, continue to examine important ways to adjust our philosophies and ideologies for the future. And that discussion is really one of the only ways that we can continue to change people's value systems.
I'll tell you what, I think that, like, in some ways I'm a professional, a professional talker in some ways. Sounds horrible when you say it, but it's just like kind of a reality. So it makes sense that I would value intercourse. Like I would value like people having interactions and discussing things and talking about things, because I know that there were the thoughts and words of other people wound up having a tremendous impact on me. My older brother, who we've talked about quite a bit, I have two older brothers, but one I've alluded to more than the other. I remember he had a conservation epiphany when he read Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac.
Yeah.
Okay? Because here's a person sort of framing the natural world and the things that he cares about. Aldo Leopold's a hunter and fisherman and a conservationist. And he explained, like in this book, he like lays out an ethos. And my brother must have saw so much of himself in there. And it was such a challenging way to view it that it changed him. I remember an essay by Tom McGuane where he said a thing, and I'm like, I had never thought about it that way, but that's exactly right. I do feel that way, and I'm so glad I just heard it, because it now makes it seem valid. And it's a quote that I've quoted 1,000 times, and I'll quote till the day I died, where McGuane, who's a novelist, has written screenplays and many novels, but years ago, I feel like it was in maybe like 1980 or something, he wrote a essay about hunting, and in it, he's sort of imagining this conversation between a hunter and a non-hunter, and the non-hunter says to the hunter, like, why do you kill a deer? What did deer ever do to you? And the hunter says, I can't talk about it this way. And the non-hunter says, no, like, why do deer have to die for you? Would you die for deer? And the hunter says, if it came to that. And I think that, like, in that perspective, there's such, like, I was like, it just hit me like they say in Apocalypse Now, it hit me like a diamond bullet.
Yep.
That thought.
Yeah.
Which is one of the most impossible things to explain to other people, but it has to do if you take a lifelong hunter who spends all of their free time out in the woods, hunting and fishing and enjoying nature, I can tell you one thing. They're not doing it because they hate it.
Yes.
They are not. If you spend your entire life in your house in front of your TV, fretting about the well-being of a mountain lion that you would never be able to find if you needed to, I think that there might be something a little bit disingenuous there, because you haven't done anything to demonstrate to me your actual love for the natural world, because you're ignoring it and living an existence entirely outside of it. So if there's a love there, I feel like you might love it the same way that guys in high school who had pinups of Pamela Anderson loved Pamela Anderson.
Loved the idea of Pamela Anderson.
Yeah, had no idea about anything, but there's just something about it you love.
You like the look of it.
Baseless. Because if you, like, the guys I know that live outdoors are living outdoors because they love the stuff that's out there.
That's true. And I think that's the idea. I mean, this conversation and all the conversations and the words you've written and things you've done in your life are leading to those moments where someone else has that epiphany, or someone else listens to this, or listens to one of your Meat Eater podcasts, or reads one of your books and has relatively small or large epiphany in and of itself. It doesn't really matter. I think that's when you think about hunting in its totality and where it is today, and the decrease in numbers, and I would imagine the decrease in public acceptance of some parts of it. It could be pretty daunting. You can look at that and think, we're never going to win that. This thing might go away on our watch. We may be, your kid's generation, my kid's generation may be looking at an entirely different landscape when they're our age. But I think the way we can push back against that is to have these conversations and talk about the ways that we need to get better and the ways that we can establish a system of values that works into the future. Because I don't know that we've done that yet as a hunting community as a whole.
There's an environmental historian that I'm friends with named Randall Williams, and he was telling me about another writer who said that hunting is like the constellations in the sky, where they're like constituent parts are always fixed. They don't change. The Big Dipper doesn't change shape, but its position relative to the horizon is constantly shifting.
Yeah.
So every time you look at this thing, it hasn't changed, but it appears different depending on where it is. And I think that it's a very helpful way to think about hunting. We are a couple guys sitting up on a mountainside in a bed of rabbit shit trying to find a deer. We're engaged in an activity that has been going on, no matter how you define it, it has been going on for millions of years. And we're doing it in it at its core, like bare bones parts. We're out on the landscape pursuing animals that we will eat.
Yeah.
That's the constellation. But how what we're doing would look to someone else constantly change.
Yeah. That's one thing. You can't really quote yourself on a thing, can you?
Hell yeah, man.
Okay.
You say something like I always say.
Something I said one time is that the landscape of hunting will change, but the pursuit and the pursuer will remain the same. Those two things will always be constant. We will always, as long as there is hunting, we will pursue animals, and they will run the hell away from us when we scare them.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize that you have, in this country, you have a small percentage of people who hunt. You have an even smaller percentage of people who oppose hunting. And what you have in the middle is some 70, 80% of Americans who are generally kind of like ambivalent about the subject, don't give it too much thought. If you poll them and ask them, do you support regulated hunting? They, by a wide margin, say yes. When I talk about hunting and I represent hunting, I am not talking about it and representing it in a way that is meant to antagonize or piss off that very small percentage on the other extreme. I'm talking about it and representing it in a way that I hope will wind up making sense to that vast, vast middle ground who doesn't think about it too much.
Yeah.
But now and then is presented with a question at the ballot box that basically, the question changes, but it basically is asking, is this activity constructive and positive, or is it destructive and negative?
Yeah.
And if you're living your hunting life in a way that is constructive and positive, I think that it will help guide those decisions down the road. And I do not have a fatalistic, pessimistic view toward the future.
Nor do I. I don't have that either. Realistic, I mean, pragmatic, but...
This is the last thing I'm going to say. Is you imagine the day going... You know, like a dimmer switch on a light where there's no clicks, right? It's just a smooth turn. You imagine like days would pass sort of as like a smooth turn, but out here it's like a clicky.
It's clicky.
There's like this like pre-dawn dusk, and also it's like click. And there's this kind of like long morning, and then someone goes click, and it's like very definitely all of a sudden like midday.
Dead.
And then all of a sudden they go click, and it's evening. They're about ready to click.
They're about ready to click it to evening.
Click it to evening, and it won't be gradual. It'll just be all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, it's time to look for deer.
Well, we've solved a few problems. We'll get back to the real problem, which is a buck we got to kill. We're headed back to America tomorrow. And
back to America. I like that. Back toward that big boy.
Back toward that big boy back there. Thanks, dude. Appreciate it.
Well, damn. That was a good conversation. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Thanks for bearing with me. I'm a rookie podcaster, so I may suck completely, but hopefully we'll get better every week. And we're going to do this every Tuesday morning. We're going to launch a new podcast for the Hunting Collective with a new guest, or a new group of guests, and we'll see how she goes. So stay tuned in the weeks to come. We're going to have folks like Adam Greentree, Remy Warren, hopefully guys from Hushin will stop by and join us at some point. We're going to do our best to round up some of the most interesting people in hunting and delve into some of the issues that you guys want to hear about. So make sure you check us out, thehuntingcollective.com, iTunes, Stitcher, all that fun stuff. Appreciate you hanging out. See you next time.
After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.